Hi, everybody. It's Beth Ienni, licensed therapist and food addiction recovery coach. Today, I want to talk to you about something very important. What you need to know, what you need to face to break free from food addiction. Again, if you're joining me live, my name is Beth Ienni. I'm a licensed therapist and food addiction recovery coach. I've been helping people break free from food addiction for 23 years. And I can tell you that you do need to face the facts about yourself in order to break free from food addiction. So, what are the things that you need to face? Well, first and foremost, you need to understand one simple and huge fact, which is that all of your problems are either caused or made worse by food addiction. And I know that may at first seem like, what? How could all of my problems in my life either be caused or made worse by food addiction? But think about it. Food addiction changes your brain chemistry. It changes every cell of your body. It changes everything you think, say, do, and feel and experience. It changes you. It changes your body, it changes your mind, it changes your relationship, it changes the way you do life. It changes your day-to-day life. So everything that you do, every person you interact with, every decision you make is touched by food addiction. So let's get into specifics. One thing people are really suffering with right now is depression. And it's easy to blame that depression on maybe a lifetime of disappointments and a lifetime of hardships. Many of you have endured horrible traumas, betrayals, abuse, and just horrible setbacks in every department. A lot of you have very sick family members or people who are addicted in your life, very dysfunctional family members. A lot of you have really, been to therapy for years, been on antidepressants, really been through some trials. But I'm going to be honest with you, as an expert in depression and trauma, I have to tell you that for a food addict, the number one reason why they are so stuck emotionally is food addiction. Because the fact is, everyone who gets into recovery within a couple weeks has a dramatic change in their mood and in their mental clarity. So if you're used to thinking of all of your problems being because of your trauma or because of other people, places, and things, that's part of why you're stuck, is that you're not seeing that food is actually a mind altering substance. It can help us to feel better depending on what we eat, or it can help us to feel worse. So I know if you're struggling and you're hurting, it's hard for you to imagine that food is actually making it worse, but it is. And until you face that, you're hopelessly stuck. Okay? And how does this really operate practically? So not only does food actually change your brain chemistry, just like alcohol or heroin, it does the exact same thing. It actually directly changes your mood. It directly changes your brain functioning. But because of all the horrible effects of food addiction, aside from depression, it actually makes the depression worse. For example, food addiction makes people tired. Food addiction makes people achy. Food addiction makes people sick. Food addiction makes people take a lot of medications with a lot of side effects. It makes them hate their bodies and makes them more isolated socially and avoid things. It keeps them from doing things that they want to do because either they can't do it or they don't feel comfortable doing it, right? So now your depression is made 10 times worse by all of the results of food addiction. So it just adds up and spirals down and spirals down. So the good news is you can spiral up again, but you have to understand what the root of the problem is. Now, sure, you may have some genetic predisposition to certain things like depression. Sure, you may have had a lot of very serious things happen to you. But I'm going to be honest with you, there are a lot of people walking around who 2 weeks into recovery see enormous reversals, no matter how much trauma they've been through, no matter how long standing the depression has been, because the food itself really does make a huge difference. And until you see that, you just can't understand what needs to happen next, which is you need to deal with the root problem, which is food addiction for many of you. It's the thing you can change. You may not be able to change your genetics. You may not be able to change your husband or your children or your job or your boss or the political landscape or the pandemic or your job situation. You can't change necessarily all these other things, but what you can change is what you're putting in your mouth. I know it doesn't feel that way. You're feeling out of control, but you can change it with the right information and support. Okay. So you have to face the fact that this horrible pain, this emotional pain that you feel is either caused or made worse by food addiction. You have to be able to see that. Okay. Now, there, of course, you're not a dummy. You know that so many illnesses that you're either experiencing now or afraid you will experience are caused by food addiction. You're no dummy. Maybe your doctor's already warned you about this, or you already have these diseases: diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, pain, digestive problems, autoimmune problems. The fact is, the top 10 reasons why Americans die, including, I guess, the top 11 now, COVID-19, um, are caused or made worse lots of times by food addiction, right? So the number one killer of Americans before COVID-19, and maybe still is heart disease, directly fueled by food addiction. Now, of course, some people do have some genetic factors, no doubt. We can't change that directly. But what we can do is change what fuels that heart disease okay? So you need to understand that there is something that you can do about all of these things. You're not a helpless victim, but you do need to understand how food addiction plays a role in all of these things. And in fact, I saw a very intelligent article come out the other day saying, what are we not facing about COVID-19? What we're not facing is those underlying conditions are fueled by food problems. They didn't call it food addiction because they didn't know to use the term. They said it was caused by food problems, and that's correct. That is absolutely correct. Because I believe even more than age, a risk factor are the other underlying conditions. It just so happens that a lot of older people also are aging food addicts. So, of course, the combination of age and underlying conditions is going to be worse. You can't necessarily change your age, can you? But you can change the underlying conditions. Okay, so we're talking about how food addiction is actually causing or making worse everything that you're worried about right now. So what else could you be worried about right now besides all these horrible mental and physical illnesses? Well, you may have, some sadness or upset about aging. What are some signs of aging? Pain, fatigue, memory issues, brain fog, all of that is either caused or made worse by food addiction. They say 70 is the 70 is the sorry, 50, sorry, what is it? It's 70 is the new 50. That's what it is. That's possible in recovery. That is possible in recovery. It's not necessarily possible outside of recovery. What we find is that within 2 weeks of changing food, people start to directly have huge improvements in pain, in fatigue, and in brain functioning. It's absolutely dramatic. Do a little research on how food affects dementia. A lot of people are calling dementia and Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes. Why? Because there's such a strong correlation between what we're eating and dementia. Okay? You don't have to feel as old and achy and tired and foggy as you are feeling if you're feeling that. Okay? What other things are on your mind? Relationship issues. Now, all of us have relationship problems. I've been married for 35 years. I've had my fair share of relationship problems. I have 2 adult children. I've had my fair share of adult children problems and problems with extended family, of course. But what makes it unmanageable? What makes it impossible is food addiction. Okay? Food addiction makes people irritable. It makes people exhausted. It makes people feel too sick and tired to do fun things with others, like intimacy. Also, it creates a lot of body image issues. So either you don't feel up to having intimacy or you don't want to be seen without your clothes on. Okay? So food addiction ruins marriages. Now, you may have a husband or a spouse that's not complaining, but that doesn't mean that the marriage isn't suffering. You know as well as anyone else that intimacy is part of marriage. And even if it's not, even if it doesn't, maybe it's not like the same as when you were 20 or 30, that's fine. But you're supposed to feel good about yourself and feel well enough to enjoy your spouse and do things together, fun things, have some laughs, and be up to enjoying each other in whatever form that takes. Okay. And if you're single, food addiction is a large part of that because, again, you're exhausted, you don't like the way you look, you just don't feel well. So you're either not willing or able to interact with people the way you really need to have good relationships. Okay. And the fact is, between the brain fog and the irritability, it does hurt all relationships to have a food addiction. It gets in the way of your confidence, your ability to connect with other people. There's a lot of irritability and inability to do things. A lot of people are worried so much about money these days, but I'm going to tell you that COVID-19 or no, long term, the biggest threat to your finances is food addiction. Because the fact is, if you've lost your job, you're too foggy and exhausted to learn a new job. The fact is, there are lots of opportunities online. But if you're too foggy and exhausted to take advantage of that, then how can you learn something new? How can you enroll in a new class? How can you have any confidence in yourself? How can you think clearly, right? If you're physically falling apart, you know that your job prospects were in danger before COVID-19. And if you've lost your job, it's going to be harder to find one. It's hard. It's when you are obese and sick, it is much harder to find a job. So you have to face the fact that financial problems are caused or made worse by food addiction. And I'll tell you what else happens. There's a lot of lost income that happens over the lifetime of a food addict because he or she doesn't have the confidence or the wherewithal to get ahead. Lots of people wind up not being able to work at all. And then there's all the addictive spending that happens, the brain fog spending, the stress spending. If you don't get to the root of your addictive tendencies, you take it out with your finances. So a lot of times people don't realize that the reason why they're in the hole financially is because they have not gotten to the root of their addictions. And food addiction is usually the primary one for people. It's really changing the brain chemistry and it's really changing quality of life hugely. And then there's all kinds of things that are harder to grasp that are soul crushing. The fact is, a lot of you are not who you know you could be. You get up every morning and you realize, ugh, I feel awful again. I hate my life again. I'm not living the life I know I could live again. You see yourself just not being who you know you could be over and over again. And that's soul crushing. Because when you're lost in an addiction, you simply can't live up to your true calling in life, whether that's a career thing, a volunteer thing, a ministry, some kind of art, or some kind of gift that you have that you're not using. You just don't have the mental clarity or the energy to pursue these things. You just don't feel up to it. So all of your problems are either caused or made worse by food addiction. And the faster you realize that, the better off you're going to be. And you have to fast forward the movie because it's not just today that you should be worried about. The fact is, if you don't get this under control, your finances are going to blow up because long-term care is not covered by most insurances. So you're either going to bankrupt yourself or your family, or someone's going to have to take care of you. And yes, your worst nightmare may come true that you're going to be a burden to other people, either financially or practically or both. Now, I used to work in nursing facilities and I saw the end of the movie for a lot of food addicts. The reality is, diabetes complications are not pretty. There are things worse than death. And I'm sure if you're honest with yourself, you already know this. Sure, it would be a shame for your family to lose you suddenly to a heart attack or a stroke, but there are much worse things than sudden death. For example, I used to visit people in nursing homes who had diabetes complications. They were either blind and or had amputations, and they had to be cared for in nursing facilities. And the fact is, the family was not able to be there most of the time, and they had their lives to lead. And that person spent a lot of time alone in a room, and not really participating in things. So that's a very sad state of affairs, and it was my job to go visit, and I was happy to do it. But I also felt, wow, food addiction really has claimed this person's life. And even with all of that, this one patient I have in my head, he still wasn't controlling his food, even with all of that. Then I used to visit a stroke victim who was completely paralyzed. The net result of her stroke was that was bedridden. She could not speak hardly at all, and she was in chronic pain. And she couldn't advocate for herself to get proper pain medications because no one was visiting her and no one seemed to understand that she needed pain medications. And it was my job to try to console her and try to advocate for her. And it was probably the worst human suffering I've ever witnessed. There are real consequences to food addiction, and you don't want to candy coat that. Okay, you don't want to whitewash that. And there are plenty of other stroke victims that, were able to talk a bit and move a bit, and maybe we're not in that much pain. But the fact is, it was very common in the nursing facilities to see people who were stroke victims who could not leave the nursing facility and were not their normal selves. So that is fairly common. So you have to fast forward the movie. You can't just think about today or maybe dying young, because that's not all you'd have to think about. And all those family members were affected, right? And, loss of mobility, pain for other reasons, all of that, dementia, all of that is connected to food addiction. So please don't kid yourself. This is not addiction junior or addiction light. Food addiction is sneaky and it ruins lives. And it's very, very dangerous. There have been lots of studies to show that a heroin addict who is not using dirty needles, who is not overdosing, a heroin addict that has some common sense about avoiding those things, actually is not hurting their body at all sometimes in terms of like long-term use. I mean, there have been many studies of heroin addicts who have been addicted to heroin for decades, and there was no significant change in their health. Think about that. Whereas food addiction or other things like alcoholism, there's huge changes in health. So we have to understand that food addiction is not some kind of a less than addiction. It is ruining lives. So you have to face that all of your problems are either caused or made worse by food addiction, and you have to understand that your future is dependent on you getting this figured out now, because tomorrow it may be too late. Which leads me to the third thing. You have to stop delaying. You have to stop collecting research and reading another article on keto. You have to stop minimizing. You have to stop whitewashing and delaying. Many of you have heard me talk about that urban myth about a frog in a pot. It may not be an urban myth, or maybe it's just a regular myth. But there's a story that if you put a frog in room temperature water and slowly turn up the heat, that frog won't jump out of the pot until it boils to death, because it won't see it coming. It won't feel the heat getting hotter. Okay, and that's a good analogy for what most food addicts go through. The fact is, many of you are already on the road to ruin. You're aware of it, but you just don't seem to understand how close you are to boiling to death. And it's my job as a food addiction coach to wake you up and to say, you're much closer than you think. You're going to have to wake up and jump out of that pot. And the way you do that is, again, to face the facts, okay? And you have to get into action. Okay, the time for thinking about it and wondering when is a good time and trying another keto app, that's done. You're running out of time. You have to get to the root of this problem right now. You cannot delay it another day. Now, many of you, you're so deep into the depression and the self-hatred. You're so helpless and hopeless. You're thinking, Amy, I can face all this just fine. I just know that I'm hopeless and helpless and I can't get help. I've already tried everything. I've tried 100 things. And I understand that mentality. First of all, it's a sign of depression to be hopeless and helpless and to give up. So that's part of, unfortunately, the stuckness of depression. I get that. Also, what I get is that the information just isn't out there. So you already tried the weight loss surgery, perhaps. You already tried the diet pill, perhaps. You already tried every single commercial weight loss program you could get your hand on. You may have tried therapy. You may have tried all kinds of alternative treatments, hormones, hypnotherapy, acupuncture. If you're like most food addicts who have been at this for decades, you have literally tried and failed 100 things. But I want to explain why that's happened so that you don't have to feel helpless and hopeless another day. The reason why you keep failing is not because there's no solution, and it's not because you are too damaged to get better. The reason why you haven't gotten better is either you did not get help for food addiction, or the help that you thought you were getting for food addiction was simply unprofessional, or it was one size fits all, or just the wrong kind. And I apologize on behalf of the whole healthcare industry that we have let you down. The fact is, food addiction is an emerging field, and there are precious few people who understand even what it is, much less how to help you with it. So yeah, of course, if you went to a commercial weight loss program, they're not set up for food addicts. Of course you were going to fail. Keto's not set up for food addiction. Whole food, plant-based, Atkins, low carb, whatever diet you've been on is not set up for food addiction. Simply restricting calories or exercising more is not addressing food addiction. Therapy does not address food addiction at all. It doesn't address food addiction at all. Your doctor, your nutritionist, your dietitian has no training in food addiction. So there's a reason why this didn't work. Now, maybe you went to a neighborhood community center and tried something for food addiction, or you read a book on food addiction. Again, if it wasn't professional, or if it was one size fits all, it wasn't going to help you, unfortunately. And it's just a sad fact that there isn't a lot of good help out there. But it doesn't mean there isn't any help out there. It just means that you hadn't found it yet. So please stop blaming yourself. Please don't think that you're broken. Just understand that it's an emerging field and you just hadn't gotten the right information and support yet. Okay? So listen, if you're ready to face the realities that I've just talked about, if you're willing to face how much food addiction is ruining your life, how much it will ruin your life, if you're willing to face that you have an urgent life or death problem that needs to be figured out today and not tomorrow, I want you to reach out to us. We offer free calls to anyone who's interested in getting professional help today, not tomorrow, but today. Okay? Our help is fast, it's permanent, and it's easier than you think. But you have to get into action. You can't delay and delay and delay. So we're going to put in the comment section below some information so that you can just click on a link and schedule a call with us. Or you can just go to amybethcall.com. That's Amy, A-M-Y, Beth, B-E-T-H, call, C-A-L-L.com, amybethcall.com. We get on the phone with you for about an hour. We talk to you about your situation, what's going wrong with your food and your health right now. What are your goals? And we ask you some questions to make sure that you're actually ready to change. And if we know we can help you, we tell you what we do. And if we don't think we can help you, we will be honest and we'll tell you that too. But either way, it's going to be the best hour you've ever spent getting real and facing the truth about your food addiction, which is necessary if you're ever going to get better. And we look forward to speaking with you.